Finger, ear, finger, oh, tongue.
Doc Squishybits plucked the severed tongue from one of the many blades on his power claw and popped it into his mouth. Cleaning his tools after battle was one of his favourite things to do, especially when it yielded tasty treats. He loved Umi tongues, much softer than squig or grot tongues. Squishybits continued to pick the gore from his claw, ignoring the scowl of his boss. Gred Boneshredda wrung the haft of his huge chopper impatiently, peering around the war camp of the Tuffboyz, hoping to catch a glimpse of who he was waiting for. He'd already spoken to Krug, his second in command, and the Knobs about where he was heading, so it was just his two oddboyz he still needed a word with. Behind him, at the edge of camp, the truck's engine sputtered and growled idly. Gred hadn't driven a truck himself in quite some time. When it was time to fight, he usually stood in the tray at the back where he could yell right in his boy's ears, or on top of the roof, enjoying the wind on his face and the bugs in his teeth. Granted, there was no windshield on this truck, so maybe he would get a few beetles on this trip anyway. But the driver's seat was meant for a much smaller orc than him, one who wasn't encased in a boxy suit of mega armor. He could take the armor off, but that would just be naff. Gred hadn't taken this armor off since the day he got it, and he certainly wasn't about to remove it now. It hadn't occurred to Gred that the armor was bolted to his flesh and would not be possible to remove anyway, but that only would have made him feel smarter in his decision. On his left shoulder, Dak nervously fidgeted with a bullet casing. The Gunnagrot didn't like the sound of the trip they were going on, but nothing could be scarier than what might happen if he said no to the boss.
Finger, nose, nipper. Ahoy! There he is, boss!
Squishybits pointed past the squig pens, and a hunched, even by orc standards, rotund figure ambled towards them. Edbanger Scabgog held his copper staff close as he shuffled through the camp, his head throbbing with pain. There had been a proper good scrap with the Umis today, and the lads still hadn't settled down. He could hear their cheering, their swearing, their laughter rattling around in his skull. The totem faces on his staff glowed dimly and began to vibrate. Scabgog thought he might throw up again. He had thrown up a lot today, mostly when a knob picked him up and squeezed him so the resulting torrent of ectoplasm would incinerate whichever Umis were unfortunate enough to be in the way. He didn't like throwing up, or being picked up by knobs, or being in fights at all. He just wanted to sit in his shack where it was nice and quiet, away from all the other boys, and make a big bowl of squig soup. But when the boss calls, it doesn't matter if you have a rotten headache and a stressy tummy. Finally, Scabgog arrived at the meeting point by the truck.
Yeah, boss,
Scabgog muttered, scratching between the folds of his exposed brain.
About time you showed up. We been waiting.
Gred glowered at the portly weird boy, who shrank into himself even more.
Now listen up, both of yous. All's heading off for a bit.
Where you going, boss?
Doc Squishybits interjected through a mouthful of Yumi kneecap.
Let me finish, you git!
Gred bellowed, rising to his full height, 7 or 8 feet tall, and that was without the added bulk of the mega armor. The pain boy flung his hands up by his side in protest, and Scabgog flinched as a claw-mounted syringe came dangerously close to his left eye. Gred snorted.
Some boys use are. One of yous is always late and the other won't let his boss get a word in. Now listen here and listen proper, cause I was only saying this once. You see them mountains over there?
Gred pointed a cracked nail over to the east, where a series of rugged peaks jutted skyward, like giant teeth.
The Buzz brothers flew over them in their copters before the scrap. They say there's boys up there. Feral boys who ain't got no shooters or no whats or nothing. But they's hard. Proper hard. Hard enough to be Tuffboyz if they only had some gubbins. I was gonna go out there and bring 'em back here, even if I was gotta break some heads.
The warboss grinned, tusks gleaming in the evening light.
Especially if I was gotta break some heads. So keep an eye on the lads while I was gone. Krug's in charge till I was back. Listen to him and the knobs. Don't get in too big of a scrap without me. And whatever you do, don't take the Stompa.
Gred pointed again, this time at a different mountain. The monument of scrap metal and heavy-duty dakka that loomed over the Tuffboyz camp. The Stompa stood like a sentinel over them, its faceplate describing a toothy orc grimace. The colossal mega-chopper on its right arm, and the cluster of multi-barreled ballistic insanity that constituted its left remained raised in its inactivity, as if standing guard over the orcs. Doc Squishybits gazed in awe at the monolith of belligerence, flexing his claw as he took in each of the mega-chopper's gigantic, jagged teeth. How he would love to pilot the Stompa, to tower over the runty Yumi gargants and obliterate those runts with its dizzying array of Dakar, to be deafened by the roar of mighty engines as the mega-chopper carved through tanks as though they were nothing more than slow-cooked Aidan squigs. Scabgog did not want to be anywhere near the Stompa. Every boy in Grot and Gred's retinue had a hand in assembling the mechanical monster, and they had all poured a part of themselves into it, their souls singing at the top of their lungs in prayer to Gork and Mork with each panel, spike, and shooter hammered into place. The Stompa was a reservoir of unfathomable war energy, waiting to be unleashed and bring the frenzied boys' excitement to fever pitch. For a weird boy to expose themselves to that level of energy could be catastrophic for themselves, not to mention every other orc in a 5-mile radius. Scabgog didn't have any of the words to articulate this. All he knew was that looking at the Stompa made his tummy feel funny.
It took a lot of scrap to get it all put together. I don't want yous taking it for a joyride like it was some fun buggy out on the racetrack.
Gred's voice lowered, and his brow came down like a green thundercloud.
I means it. Do not take the Stompa.
Got it, boss!
Doc Squishybits said a little too enthusiastically, giving a salute with his claw that came close to becoming his third auto-lobotomy. Scabgog muttered indistinctly in agreement, clutching the staff with one hand and his ample stomach with the other. Satisfied, Gred gave a nod and turned to the truck. He threw his chopper in the passenger seat, then attempted to enter the truck himself. It took a minute or so to cram himself into the driver's seat, and his enormous form rent the carriage's doorframe at the edges. Dak, clinging to Gred's shoulder for dear life as he heaved himself into the vehicle, was now squashed between the roof of the carriage and Gred's shoulder-mounted big shooter.
Get comfy, Dak.
The boss said, enveloping the steering wheel in his massive green hands.
It's gonna be a bumpy ride.
Gred floored it. The two oddboyz watched as their boss tore off into the east, disappearing in a cloud of dust and black smoke. Scabgog scratched his frontal lobe again, then spoke.
What do we do now, Squishy Bits?
The pain boy grinned and turned around, eyes meeting the Stompa's faceplate. He clapped his hand on the weird boy's back.
Scabgog, me old mate,
he said.
We's taking that fun buggy out on the racetrack.